brutal life of medieval knights on the battlefield. Hello guys, welcome back to Boring Historian. Tonight we are donning our imaginary mail shirts, hefting a not-so-imaginary sense of foreboding, and venturing into the mud and blood-soaked theater of medieval warfare. We're not just looking at the grand strategies or the clash of empires. Oh no. We're zooming in uncomfortably close to the very personal, often horrifically brutal life of the medieval knight on the battlefield. Imagine the clang of steel, the screams of the wounded, the sheer visceral terror of close-quarters combat. All before the invention of anesthetics, or indeed a decent pair of shock-absorbing insoles. What you're about to hear might stick with you. It's a world away from the shining armor and chivalric romances, a stark look at the grim reality of being a medieval fighting machine. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. And as always, please do drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from and what your local time is. It's always fascinating to see our global congregation of history enthusiasts seeking some nocturnal enlightenment. All right, find your quiet space. Let the outside world fade. And let's begin our journey. Your story, our aspiring knight, doesn't begin on the battlefield itself, not yet. It begins, as most stories do, with your birth. But this isn't just any birth. You are born into a noble family, a lineage that carries with it certain expectations. If you were a daughter, as we've explored in previous nocturnal wanderings, your path would be one of dynastic marriage, a gilded cage of political alliance. But you, in this imagining, are a son. And for a son of noble blood in the medieval period, particularly one who is not the firstborn destined to inherit the lion's share of the family lands and titles, the path to honor, to status, and indeed, to a livelihood, often lay along the hard, unforgiving road of knighthood. From your earliest muling days, the clang of steel, the neighing of war horses, the talk of feudal obligations and martial prowess, these are the background music to your young life. There's no question of you becoming a doctor, or a lawyer, or, heaven forbid, an interpretive dancer. Your destiny, it is tacitly understood, involves a horse, a lance, and a willingness to charge headlong into very dangerous situations. Your very early childhood, those first few years, might be spent within the relative, and I use that term loosely, comfort of your family's castle or manor house, under the care of your mother and a retinue of nurses and servants. But this domestic idyll, if it ever truly existed, is fleeting. Around the tender age of 7 or 8, an age when modern children are still grappling with multiplication tables and the existential angst of choosing a favorite cartoon character, you are deemed ready to begin your formal education. And this education does not involve a gentle introduction to the liberal arts at the local academy. No, for you, it means being fostered out. It means leaving your home, your parents, your familiar surroundings, and being sent to serve in the household of another lord. Perhaps a powerful relative, a renowned knight, or your father's own feudal overlord. A mainstream historical fact for you. Fostering was a widespread practice among the medieval nobility across Europe. It was seen as a way for a boy to learn the skills and etiquette of his class, to forge important social connections, and to develop loyalty and discipline away from the potentially coddling influence of his own family. It was also a way for lords to build a network of loyal young men who would, in time, become their trusted vassals and knights. Imagine that moment of departure. You're barely more than a baby by our standards, perhaps clutching a crudely carved wooden horse, your eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a dawning boyish excitement. Your mother might shed a tear, quickly hidden. Your father might offer a gruff word of encouragement, a reminder to uphold the family honor. And then you're off, riding away with a grim-faced retainer towards a new life, a new set of rules, and the beginning of a training so rigorous it would make a modern drill sergeant blanch. The emotional impact of this early separation This abrupt severing from familial comfort is something historians still argue about. Did it breed a generation of emotionally hardened, self-reliant young men, perfectly suited to the brutal demands of medieval warfare? Or did it create a deep-seated loneliness, a yearning for connection that might later find expression in the intense bonds of brotherhood forged with fellow knights, or in the idealized devotion of courtly love? Perhaps both. Your new home is another castle, another bustling, noisy, and often rather unsanitary noble household. Here, your formal training begins. You start as a page, a kind of aristocratic apprentice come servant. Your duties are varied and often menial. You run errands, you serve at table, learning the intricate etiquette of when to kneel, when to pour the wine, how to carve the meat without sending a roasted pheasant flying into the lap of a visiting bishop, a skill surprisingly difficult to master. Apparently, you learn to care for your lord's clothes, to make his bed, to attend to his personal needs. It's not all glamour, this path to knighthood. There's a lot of fetching and carrying, a lot of being at the beck and call of older, more important people. But it's all part of the curriculum. You are learning obedience, service, and the complex social hierarchy of the medieval world. You're also learning by observing, watching how your lord conducts himself, how he deals with his vassals, how he manages his estates, how he prepares for war. Every day is a lesson in what it means to be a nobleman, a leader, a future knight. It's like an incredibly immersive and occasionally terrifying internship where spilling the soup could result in a clout to the ear rather than a gentle reprimand from HR. Alongside these domestic duties, your physical and martial education begins, albeit gently at first. You learn to ride a horse, not just for pleasure, but as an extension of your own body, a vital skill for any future knight. You practice with toy weapons, perhaps small wooden swords and shields, engaging in mock battles with other pages, learning the basic stances and movements of combat. You participate in games that build strength, agility, and strategic thinking, wrestling, running, swimming, and various forms of mock combat. Hunting is another crucial part of your education. You learn to track game, to handle hounds, to use a bow and arrow, or a small spear. Hunting wasn't just a sport. It was training for war, teaching you horsemanship, woodcraft, and the thrill of the chase, all skills that would serve you well on the battlefield. You're not just bagging a few rabbits for the pot. You're learning how to pursue and dispatch an enemy, albeit a furry, four-legged one for now. As you move into your early teens, around the age of 14 or so, you graduate from page to squire. This is a significant step up. You are no longer just a household servant. You are now an apprentice knight, assigned to a specific knight or lord, whom you will serve directly, and from whom you will learn the finer points of your martial craft. The training becomes far more intense, more focused, more brutal. Your days are filled with relentless physical conditioning. You practice swordsmanship for hours, not with wooden toys anymore, but with blunted steel weapons, learning the cuts, the thrusts, the parries, the footwork. The sheer weight of a medieval sword, designed to cleave through mail and bone, is immense, and building the strength and stamina to wield it effectively for prolonged periods is an arduous process. Your arms ache, your muscles burn, your knuckles are raw and bleeding. But you persevere. There are no shortcuts, no easy options. Your life, and the lives of those who will one day depend on you, may hang on your skill with that blade. Lance practice is another cornerstone of your training. You learn to couch a heavy wooden lance under your arm, to guide your charging warhorse with your knees, and to strike a target with accuracy and force. Your primary practice opponent is the quinton, a weighted target, often a shield or a dummy shaped like an enemy soldier, that pivots when struck. If you hit it incorrectly or too slowly, it can swing around and deliver a hefty clout to your backside, much to the amusement of your fellow squires and the exasperation of your knightly instructor. It's a comical image, perhaps, but the underlying purpose is deadly serious. The ability to deliver a shattering lance strike from horseback, to unhorse an opponent in the first charge, is the knight's signature skill, the anachronistic equivalent of a fighter pilot mastering aerial combat. It requires perfect coordination, immense strength, and unwavering courage. You'll spend countless hours thundering towards that quinton, enduring the jarring impact, the occasional painful fall, all to perfect that one devastating moment of impact. Horsemanship is home to an art form. Your warhorse, or destrier, is not just a means of transport. It is your partner in battle, a highly trained and incredibly valuable animal. You learn to control it with subtle shifts of weight and pressure, to maneuver it in the chaos of a melee, to care for its needs, to understand its temperament. The bond between a knight and his warhorse is legendary, a partnership forged in countless hours of training and shared danger. Losing your horse in battle could be a death sentence, leaving you vulnerable and unhorsed amidst the carnage. So, you treat your mount with a respect bordering on reverence, even if it does occasionally try to bite you or step on your foot when you're not paying attention. They're majestic, but they're still animals, and probably have their own opinions on the wisdom of charging into a wall of pointy sticks. Alongside this relentless martial training, your duties as a squire continue. You are responsible for maintaining your knight's armor and weapons, a laborious and time-consuming task. Armor, especially the later plate armor, had to be kept clean, polished to prevent rust and imperfect repair. Mail shirts needed to be scoured with sand and vinegar, leather straps replaced, rivets tightened, swords needed to be sharpened, shields repainted with your knight's heraldic device. You learn the intricacies of arming your knight, a complex process that could take a considerable amount of time and required an understanding of every strap, buckle, and plate. In battle, you would accompany your knight, carrying his spare weapons or shield, assisting him if he was unhorsed, guarding his back, and generally acting as his loyal second. It's an apprenticeship in the truest sense, learning the trade of war by doing, by observing, by being in the thick of it. Albeit initially in a supporting role, you are also being indoctrinated into the ideals of chivalry. You hear the songs of the troubadours, the epic romances of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, tales of bravery, loyalty, courtesy, and devotion to God and to one's lady. This code of chivalry, a complex and often contradictory set of ideals, was meant to govern the conduct of a knight, to elevate him from a mere brutal warrior into a noble Christian hero. You learn about the importance of honor, of keeping your word, of protecting the weak and defenseless, at least in theory, of showing mercy to a vanquished foe again. Theory and practice often diverged wildly. A quirky or fringe tidbit for you. Some chivalric romances describe knights undertaking incredibly elaborate and often rather pointless quests or vows in the name of their lady, like fighting a series of duels blindfolded, or wearing a particular piece of uncomfortable armor for a year and a day. While these are literary exaggerations, they reflect the often performative nature of chivalry, the desire to live up to an idealized, if somewhat impractical, image. Whether these ideals truly tempered the brutality of medieval warfare, or merely provided a thin veneer of noble justification for it, is a question historians still vigorously debate. Your education as a squire is not solely martial. You might learn a little heraldry, to recognize the coats of arms of different noble families, a vital skill for identifying friend from foe on a chaotic battlefield. You might learn to play a musical instrument, to sing, to dance, to compose poetry, accomplishments that would allow you to participate in the refined social life of the court. You learn the rules of courtly etiquette, how to address your superiors, how to behave with grace and decorum in the presence of ladies. It's a curious mixture of brutal warrior training and finishing school for young gentlemen. One moment you're sweating and grunting as you practice sword cuts against a pill. The next you're trying to remember the correct way to carve a peacock at a feast without looking like a complete ruffian. It's all part of the package of being a well-rounded, if somewhat dangerously overqualified, medieval knight. The discipline throughout this period is harsh. Mistakes are often met with physical punishment, a blow from your knight, a stint of extra duties, public humiliation. The training is designed to toughen you, to weed out the weak, to instill an unquestioning obedience and a high tolerance for pain and hardship. Injuries are common: broken bones from falls from horseback, cuts and bruises from weapons practice, sprains and strains from relentless exertion. Medical care, as we'll explore in more detail later when we get to the battlefield itself, is rudimentary at best. You learn to endure pain, to push your body to its limits and beyond. This brutal preparation is not for its own sake. It is a chillingly practical education for a life where violence, injury, and death are constant possibilities. Every grueling exercise, every painful lesson, is designed to increase your chances of survival and victory in the brutal arena of medieval warfare. As you approach the end of your squireship, perhaps in your late teens or early 20s, the anticipation of knighthood, the culmination of all these years of toil and training, builds. If you have served your knight well, proven your courage and skill, and if your family can afford the considerable expense of providing you with a war horse, armor, and weapons, knighthood wasn't cheap. You may finally be deemed ready. The ceremony of knighting itself is a profound and symbolic rite of passage, often involving a night of prayer and vigil, a ritual bath of purification, the donning of white garments signifying purity, and then the accolade, the symbolic tap of a sword on your shoulder by your lord or another knight, formally admitting you into the exclusive brotherhood of chivalry. You swear solemn oaths to uphold the knightly virtues, to serve your lord faithfully, to protect the church, to defend the innocent. You are no longer a boy, an apprentice. You are a knight, a warrior, a member of the martial elite, forged in the crucible of a long and brutal training. And the battlefield, with all its horrors and its fleeting glories, now awaits you. Your path, paved with sweat, blood, and an almost unimaginable degree of physical and mental endurance, has led you to this point. The real test is about to begin. You've made it. After years of relentless, often brutal, training, from the menial tasks of a page to the demanding duties and martial drills of a squire, you have finally received the accolade. That symbolic tap of the sword on your shoulder has transformed you. You are Sir Knight now, a member of that elite iron-willed brotherhood. Your path to glory, or more likely, to a muddy and unceremonious end on some god-forsaken battlefield, now well and truly open. The solemn oaths you swore during your knighting ceremony, to protect the church, to defend the innocent, to serve your lord faithfully, still echo in your ears, a noble soundtrack to a future that promises to be anything but consistently noble or particularly pleasant. But before you can charge off to perform deeds of valor, or more practically to secure your lord's territorial ambitions, there's a crucial and decidedly unglamorous hurdle to overcome: getting dressed for the occasion. And by dressed, I don't mean donning a natty new tunic and a jaunty feathered cap. I mean encasing yourself in a suffocating, clanking, and mind-bogglingly heavy suit of steel, a personal fortress that is both your greatest protection and, in many ways, your most immediate tormentor. Welcome to the steel embrace of medieval armor. The romantic image of the knight in shining armor, galloping gracefully across a sun-dappled field, is a powerful one, isn't it? It's the stuff of legends, of storybooks, of Hollywood blockbusters, usually with suspiciously clean and well-fitting costumes. The reality, as you are about to discover firsthand, is rather less shiny and considerably more sweaty, restrictive, and prone to causing chafing in places you'd rather not discuss in polite company, even the company of your stoic warhorse. Your armor is not just a fashion statement. It is a life-saving necessity, a testament to your status. Good armor was phenomenally expensive and a significant factor in how you will fight, how you will move, and indeed, how you will survive or fail. To survive the brutal chaos of the medieval battlefield, the process of arming, of donning your metallic carapace, is not something you do casually, like throwing on a modern hoodie before heading out for a latte. It's a ritual, a laborious undertaking that requires the assistance of at least one, and often two, patient and highly skilled squires. Remember all those years you spent as a squire, learning the intricacies of every buckle, strap, and rivet on your own knight's armor? Well, now it's your turn to stand there, trying not to fidget, while your own squire, young Thomas, of the slightly too eager expression, fusses and strains to encase you in your iron cocoon. First comes the padded undergarment, the gambeson or a keaton. This is a thick quilted jacket, often made of linen or leather stuffed with wool, horsehair, or scraps of cloth. It serves multiple purposes. It provides some cushioning against the chafe and weight of the metal armor. It absorbs some of the impact from blows, and it can even offer a degree of protection on its own against glancing cuts. Putting it on is your first taste of the heat and constriction that will define your armored experience. It's like wearing a very heavy, very sweaty duvet. Even before the real fun begins, you're already starting to feel a bit like a well-stuffed sausage, and this is just layer one. Don't forget the padded chausses for your legs, and perhaps a padded coif for your head. If you're going old school with a mail hood, it's all about that quilted comfort. Or rather, quilted discomfort. Next, if you're from an earlier part of the medieval period, or if full plate isn't quite your style or your budget, comes the mail, often called chainmail. This is a shirt, or hauberk, made of thousands of tiny, interlinked iron rings. A full mail hauberk could weigh anywhere from 20 to 40 pounds. That's about 9 to 18 kilograms. For those of you on the metric system of suffering, and it drapes over your body with a distinctly cold, heavy, and surprisingly flexible embrace. It's excellent at stopping slashing cuts from swords or axes, but less effective against a well-aimed thrust from a spear or a powerful blow from a mace, which could still break bones or cause serious internal injuries through the mail. You'll also likely have mail chausses for your legs, a mail coif for your head and neck worn over or under that padded coif, and perhaps mail mittens. The sheer weight of all this interconnected iron settles onto your shoulders, a constant, wearying reminder of your martial profession. And the sound. Every movement you make is accompanied by a characteristic metallic rustle and clink, like a very heavily burdened wind chime. You won't be sneaking up on anyone in this outfit, unless they happen to be conveniently deaf or distracted by a particularly loud siege engine. As the medieval period progresses, particularly from the 14th century onwards, plate armor becomes increasingly sophisticated and prevalent, especially for well-equipped knights. This is where the shining armor image truly comes into its own, though keeping it shining is a squire's nightmare of polishing with sand and vinegar. Plate armor consists of shaped and articulated steel plates covering virtually the entire body. Think breastplates and backplates, pauldrons for the shoulders, vambraces and rerebraces for the arms, cuisses for the thighs, greaves for the shins, sabatons for the feet, and gauntlets for the hands. Each piece has to be strapped and buckled into place, a complex jigsaw puzzle of protective steel. A mainstream historical fact for you. A full suit of Gothic plate armor from the late 15th century could weigh between 45 and 55 pounds, around 20-25 kilograms. But because the weight was distributed more evenly over the body than mail, it could paradoxically feel less burdensome to a trained wearer than a heavy hauberk, and offered significantly better protection against a wider variety of weapons. However, less burdensome is a very relative term when you're essentially a walking, talking, or rather, muffled-sounding tin can. The helmet is, of course, a crucial component. Early knights might wear a simple conical helmet with a nasal guard. Later, you have the Great Helm, an all-encompassing bucket that offered excellent protection but severely limited vision and ventilation. Imagine trying to fight while looking through a couple of narrow letterbox slits, all while breathing your own increasingly stale and CO2-rich air. Then come the more refined baskinets, often with movable visors like the hound skull, with its protruding snout-like visor, which gave you the charming look of an angry metallic anteater. And eventually, the salettes and armets of the late medieval period, offering a better balance of protection and visibility. Whatever the style, once that helmet is on and the visor is down, your world transforms. Your vision is narrowed to a slit, your hearing muffled by the steel, your breath echoing uncomfortably close. Claustrophobia is a distinct possibility, especially if you're not used to it. It's like trying to operate heavy machinery while wearing a very restrictive, very noisy, and very hot metal scuba mask. Being fully encased in this steel embrace is a unique and profoundly uncomfortable experience. The sheer weight is a constant factor. Every step, every movement requires a significant physical effort. You're not just carrying your own body weight. You're carrying the weight of a small metallic person on your back, front, and limbs. The heat buildup inside the armor, especially on a warm day or during strenuous activity like, say, fighting for your life, can be intense. There's very little ventilation. You sweat profusely, your padded undergarments becoming sodden and clinging. Dehydration is a serious risk, and the noise, the clanking, scraping, creaking of metal on metal, of leather straps straining, accompanies your every move. It's a symphony of discomfort, a constant reminder of your martial shell. Movement is, naturally, restricted, while well-made plate armor was surprisingly flexible, allowing for a greater range of motion than many people imagine. Knights could mount horses, wield weapons, and even, if unhorsed, get back on their feet. Albeit with some effort, you are still not going to be doing any ballet or parkour in this outfit. Every action is more deliberate, more energy-consuming. Simply walking requires a conscious effort. Getting onto your warhorse, even with the aid of a squire or a mounting block, is a significant undertaking. And if you fall off, especially in the mud and chaos of a battlefield, getting back up can be a monumental struggle, leaving you vulnerable to an enemy with a pointy stick and a score to settle. Historians still argue about the precise degree of mobility afforded by different types of medieval armor, with some experimental archaeologists demonstrating surprising agility, while historical accounts often emphasize the encumbrance and exhaustion faced by heavily armored knights. Then there are your weapons, the tools of your brutal trade, each designed for a specific and usually rather unpleasant purpose. Your primary weapon as a mounted knight is the lance. This is not the light, flimsy thing you see in theatrical jousts. A war lance is a long, heavy spear, typically made of ash wood, tipped with a sharp steel head, designed to be couched under your arm and driven into an opponent with the combined force of your charging warhorse. The impact can be devastating, capable of piercing armor, unhorsing a rider, or killing outright. But it's essentially a one-shot weapon. Once the charge is over, and your lance is either shattered, stuck in an unfortunate enemy, or simply dropped, you need to resort to your sidearms. The sword is, of course, the iconic weapon of the knight, a symbol of your status and your martial prowess. There are various types. The longsword, often wielded with two hands for greater power and reach, especially by unhorsed knights. The arming sword, a shorter, single-handed weapon, often used in conjunction with a shield. These are not delicate fencing foils. They are heavy, Well-balanced blades of high-quality steel, if you can afford it. Designed for both cutting and thrusting, capable of shearing through mail, denting plate, and inflicting horrific wounds. Remember all those hours you spent practicing your cuts and parries as a squire? This is where that training pays off. Or fails to. Your life depends on your ability to wield that heavy blade with speed, precision, and relentless aggression, even when you're exhausted, wounded, and encased in what feels like a mobile oven. But the sword isn't always the most effective weapon against a fully armored opponent. Sometimes, you need something with a bit more oomph. Something that can crush and concuss rather than just cut. This is where weapons like the mace, the warhammer, and the battle axe come into their own. A mace is essentially a heavy club, often with a flanged or knobbed head, designed to deliver devastating blunt force trauma, crushing helmets, breaking bones, and generally turning your opponent's insides into an unapadded pate, even through their armor. The warhammer, with its heavy head and often a spike on the back, is equally brutal, capable of punching through plate or delivering a stunning blow. The battle axe, whether single or double-bitted, combines cutting power with a focused impact. These are not subtle weapons. They are instruments of brute force, designed to batter an armored opponent into submission. Wielding them effectively, while encumbered by your own armor, requires immense strength and a certain grim determination. It's less elegant swordsmanship and more enthusiastic, heavily armed demolition work. And let's not forget the dagger, your weapon of last resort. If you find yourself in a desperate grapple, unhorsed, and perhaps with your primary weapon lost, a sturdy dagger, like a rondel or a ballock dagger. Yes, that's really what it was called, due to the shape of its hilt. Try not to snigger. This is serious history. Could be used to target the vulnerable gaps in an opponent's armor, the armpits, the groin, the visor slits. This is the grim reality of close-quarters combat, a brutal, intimate struggle for survival, where any advantage, any weapon, is seized upon. A quirky or fringe tidbit for you. Some knights had very specific, almost superstitious, attachments to their weapons or pieces of armor. A sword might be given a name, like King Arthur's Excalibur, and believed to possess special qualities, or even a will of its own. A particular helmet might be considered lucky, or a dented shield might be kept as a memento of a hard-fought victory. These weren't just tools. They were companions in danger, extensions of the knight's own identity and martial spirit. You might find yourself muttering a prayer to your favorite ancestral sword, Old Choppy, before a charge, hoping it remembers all the good times you've had dismembering your enemies together. Being encased in this steel shell, armed with these brutal implements, has a profound psychological impact. On one hand, it offers a sense of protection, of invulnerability. You are a walking fortress, a juggernaut of righteous, or at least, well-funded fury. On the other hand, it is profoundly isolating. Your senses are dulled, your connection to the outside world filtered through narrow eye slits and muffled by layers of padding and steel. You are trapped within your own clanking, sweaty, personal inferno. The sheer effort of moving and fighting in this gear is exhausting, sapping your strength, clouding your judgment. And always, there is the knowledge that despite all this protection, you are still vulnerable. A well-aimed arrow, a powerful lance thrust, a fall from your horse, a mace blow to the head, any of these can spell your doom. Your armor is a gamble, a calculated risk, a heavy price to pay for a chance at survival and glory on the medieval battlefield. And as you stand there, fully armed, your squire giving a final tug on a recalcitrant buckle, the sound of war horns echoing in the distance, you are no longer just a man. You are a weapon, a terrifying, clanking, steel-clad embodiment of medieval warfare, ready to be unleashed. May your God and your armorer have mercy on your soul. You are now a walking fortress of steel, our newly minted Sir Knight, encased in that heavy, clanking, and profoundly uncomfortable embrace of your armor, as we explored in such sweaty detail. Your sword is sharp, your lance is ready, your warhorse snorts impatiently beneath you, or perhaps beside you, as you await the dawn. The physical preparations are complete. You are, to all outward appearances, the epitome of medieval martial might, a terrifying juggernaut ready to roll. But what of the inner night? What transpires in the mind and soul during those long, dark, often sleepless hours on the eve of battle? That grim waiting period known only as the night's edge. This, my friend, is a different kind of brutal landscape. One fought not with steel and sinew, but with courage, fear, faith, and the ghosts of premonition. It's a time for prayer, for ritual, and for the gnawing anxiety that tomorrow might very well be your last day on this muddy, chaotic, and frequently unpleasant earth. The sun has dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and bloody reds, a rather unsubtle foreshadowing, perhaps, of the morrow's business. Your army has made camp, tents, ranging from the relatively spacious pavilions of the high nobility to the rough canvas shelters of the common soldiers, dot the landscape like a scattered flock of very drab, very anxious sheep. Campfires flicker, casting long, dancing shadows, their smoke coiling into the chill night air, carrying with it the smell of roasting meat, if you're lucky, damp wool, nervous horses, and the ever-present latrine trenches. It's not exactly a five-star resort, but it's home, for tonight at least. The sounds of the camp are a strange symphony. The clang of a smith's hammer, making last-minute repairs to armor. The murmur of voices, some boastful and loud, others hushed and fearful. The whinny of a restless steed. The distant cry of a sentry. The distant cry of a sentry. Scrape of a knife sharpening a blade. And perhaps, if you listen closely, the faint, heartfelt strains of a soldier singing a mournful ballad of home. For you, Sir Knight, this night is unlikely to be one of peaceful slumber. Despite the exhaustion of the day's march or the sheer physical effort of just existing inside your steel shell, your mind is a battleground of its own, a theater where hope and fear wrestle for dominance. You might find yourself replaying your training, those endless drills with the sword and lance. Remember the thud of the quinton, the ache in your arms. You might recall the stories of past battles, tales of heroism and carnage, passed down by older knights or sung by minstrels. Some of these stories are inspiring, filled with glorious charges and vanquished foes. Others are rather more sobering, tales of comrades lost, of horrific wounds, of the sheer, unpredictable chaos of combat. It's a mixed playlist for your pre-battle mental state, veering wildly from epic power anthem to existential dread folk ballad. Fear is a natural, and indeed sensible companion on the eve of battle. Only a fool or a madman would face the prospect of medieval warfare with its sharpened steel, its crushing maces, its screaming horses, and its very high probability of agonizing injury or death, without a tremor of apprehension. The true test of a knight's courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to master it, to function despite it, to ride into that storm of violence with a semblance of resolve. How do you cope with this gnawing dread? Different men have different methods. Some might adopt an air of boisterous bravado, laughing too loudly, making extravagant boasts about the number of enemies they intend to personally dispatch on the morrow. It's a way of whistling in the dark, a performance of courage that might, with luck, become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Others might seek solace in comradeship, gathering with their fellow knights, sharing a skin of wine, telling stories, or simply sitting in comfortable, understanding silence. The bonds forged between men who face death together are incredibly powerful, a shield against the loneliness of individual fear. You might find yourself confessing your anxieties to a trusted brother in arms, knowing that he understands, that he feels it too. It's the medieval equivalent of a very intense, very high-stakes team-building exercise. Alcohol might flow, though hopefully not too freely. A few cups of wine or ale could take the edge off the fear, bolster flagging spirits, and encourage a temporary, if somewhat blurry, sense of invincibility. Too much, however, and you risk facing the dawn with a splitting headache and a decidedly unknightly lack of coordination, not ideal when your life depends on your reflexes. It's a fine line between Dutch courage and disaster waiting to happen, because Sir Reginald drank the entire wineskin and now thinks he's a griffin. For those in command, your lord, perhaps, or even you, if you are a knight of some standing with your own retinue, the night brings additional burdens. You are not just responsible for your own fear, but for the morale and preparedness of your men. You might walk the camp, speaking words of encouragement, checking on equipment, ensuring that sentries are alert. You confer with other commanders, discussing strategy, terrain, intelligence reports such as they are about the enemy's strength and disposition. The weight of these responsibilities, the knowledge that the lives of many men depend on your decisions, can be a heavy cloak indeed. Sleep, for a commander on the eve of battle, is often a fleeting and unwelcome visitor. But perhaps the most significant and widespread coping mechanism, the one that transcended rank and bravado, was religion. The medieval knight, for all his martial ferocity, was expected to be a Christian warrior, fighting for God, his king, and the defense of the faith, or at least that was the official line, even if the actual reasons for the war were rather more grubby and political. The eve of battle was therefore a crucial time for spiritual preparation. You would seek out a priest or your company's chaplain to make your confession. This was no perfunctory ritual. Facing the very real possibility of imminent death, you would unburden your soul of its sins, seeking absolution and peace with God. Imagine kneeling in a makeshift chapel tent, the flickering candlelight illuminating the priest's solemn face, as you recount your failings, your pride, your anger, your moments of doubt, perhaps even that unfortunate incident with the tavern wench. In the last town you passed through, the priest would offer counsel, assign a penance to be performed if you survived, naturally, and grant you absolution. A spiritual cleansing that was believed to prepare your soul for whatever fate awaited you on the morrow. Mass would often be celebrated in the camp, a solemn service where knights and common soldiers alike would partake of the Eucharist, seeking divine strength and protection. A mainstream historical fact is that pre-battle religious services were a standard part of medieval military routine. Chroniclers frequently describe armies hearing Mass and taking communion before engaging the enemy, viewing it as essential for both spiritual readiness and morale. It was a powerful unifying ritual, reminding every man, from the highest noble to the humblest archer, that they were engaged in a common cause under the watchful eye of God. Many knights would spend a portion of the night in prayer, either alone in their tents or gathered with comrades in a vigil. You might pray to your patron saint, to the Virgin Mary, to Christ himself, beseeching their aid in the coming conflict, asking for courage, for strength, for protection from harm, and if it be God's will, for victory. You might make vows, promising to undertake a pilgrimage, to donate to a particular church, or to perform some other act of piety if you survived. These vows, made in the shadow of death, were taken with deadly seriousness. A quirky or fringe tidbit for you. Some knights developed very personal, almost superstitious, devotional practices. One might always wear a particular relic, a splinter of a saint's bone, or a piece of cloth touched to a holy shrine, believing it offered special protection. Another might have a specific sequence of prayers he recited before every battle, a personal liturgy of hope and fear. There are even tales of knights vowing to perform some extreme act of penance or chivalric service if they emerged victorious, like fighting the next battle with one eye covered, or not speaking a word until a certain deed was accomplished. The line between profound faith and desperate superstition could become rather blurred in the face mortal peril. Historians still argue about the true depth and nature of religious belief among the medieval knightly class. Were they all genuinely devout men, fighting with a clear conscience for what they believed to be a just cause? Or was much of this pre-battle piety a form of foxhole religion? A pragmatic attempt to secure divine favor and hedge one's bets before facing a very real chance of oblivion? Or was it primarily a social convention, a set of expected behaviors that reinforced group cohesion and the legitimacy of their violent profession? The answer, as with most things human, is likely a complex mixture of all these elements. Some knights were undoubtedly men of deep and sincere faith. Others were likely more cynical, more worldly. But few, if any, would have dared to ignore the religious rituals and expectations entirely. In a world where the divine was seen as an active force, constantly intervening in human affairs, to go into battle without seeking God's blessing would have been seen as an act of profound folly, if not outright blasphemy. Alongside these spiritual preparations, there were also more practical matters to attend to. You would meticulously check your armor and weapons one last time, or rather, you would supervise your squire as he did so. Every strap, every buckle, every rivet on your armor needed to be secure. Your sword blade needed to be sharp, your lance head firmly attached. Your shield, emblazoned with your heraldic device, your personal brand on the battlefield, needed to be in good repair. Your warhorse, your trusted companion, would be carefully groomed and fed, its tack checked and rechecked. Any failure of equipment in the heat of battle could be fatal. A broken strap on your helmet, a snapped rein, a sword that shattered at a crucial moment. These were the nightmares that haunted a knight's final hours before combat. You're not just checking if your phone is charged before a big presentation. You're ensuring that the very things keeping you alive are in perfect working order. The stakes are just a tad higher. Commanders would be finalizing their battle plans, perhaps based on last-minute scouting reports about the enemy's disposition or the nature of the terrain. Messengers would be hurrying back and forth. Orders would be issued, passed down through the chain of command. You might be summoned to a council of war, or receive instructions from your immediate superior about your specific role in the coming engagement, where your unit will be positioned, when you are expected to charge, what objectives you are to achieve. There's a sense of grim purposefulness in these final preparations, a focusing of the mind on the task ahead. And then, as the night wears on, an uneasy quiet might descend upon the camp. The boisterous laughter and boastful talk die down. The clang of the smith's hammer ceases. Even the horses seem to sense the impending dawn, the coming storm. There is a stillness, a heavy, pregnant silence, broken only by the occasional cough, the murmur of a prayer, the soft jingle of a harness. This is perhaps the hardest part of the wait, this final lonely vigil in the darkness. Your mind might race, replaying old memories, imagining future possibilities, or simply fixating on the cold knot of fear in your stomach. Sleep, if it comes at all, is likely to be fitful, shallow, haunted by dreams of battle, of falling, of a pain you cannot yet comprehend. You lie there, encased in your anxieties, if not yet in your full steel, acutely aware that the rising sun will bring with it a brutal reckoning, a day that will separate the living from the dead, the victors from the vanquished. The night's edge is a sharp and lonely place, and as you wait for the first, pale light of a day that may be your last, you are more than just a knight. You are a man, facing the ultimate test of his courage, his faith, and his will to survive. Section 4. The long, uneasy vigil of the night's edge, that grim interval filled with fear, prayer, and the sharpening of both steel and resolve. is finally over. A pale, reluctant dawn bleeds across the eastern sky, outlining the dark shapes of tents, the silhouettes of restless horses, and the grim, determined faces of your comrades. The air is cold, damp with dew, and thick with a tension so palpable you could almost cut it with your newly honed dagger. This is it, the day of reckoning, the day your brutal training, your heavy armor, your very existence as a knight will be put to the ultimate test. There's no more time for doubt, no more room for reflection. There is only the stark, terrifying, and perhaps strangely exhilarating prospect of battle. And for you, Sir Knight, mounted on your powerful warhorse, encased in your steel shell, the first act in this bloody drama is often the thundering, earth-shattering, and utterly terrifying cavalry charge. The camp is a hive of frenetic, purposeful activity now. Squires, like your own Ernest Thomas, rush back and forth, making final adjustments to armor, tightening saddle girths, handing up shields and helmets. The smell of wood smoke from hastily extinguished fires mingles with the scent of nervous sweat and the metallic tang of weaponry. You can hear the snorting and stamping of hundreds, perhaps thousands of horses, their breath misting in the cool morning air. There's the jingle of harnesses, the clatter of armor, the gruff commands of captains and sergeants forming their men into battle lines. You take a final swig of water, or perhaps a fortifying gulp of ale if your nerves are particularly frayed. Say a last hurried prayer, and then, with the help of your squire, you swing your heavily armored leg over the high cantle of your war saddle, settling into that familiar creaking leather seat, feeling the powerful muscles of your destrier bunch beneath you. You are no longer just a man. You are part of a terrifying mobile weapon system, a medieval tank forged of flesh, steel, and furious intent. You take your place in the formation, perhaps a dense squadron or convoy of knights, bannerets, and their retainers, shoulder to armored shoulder with your brethren. The banners and pennants of your lord, and those of other nobles, snap and flutter in the morning breeze, a vibrant, defiant splash of color against the grim backdrop of impending violence. You can see the enemy lines across the field, a distant, dark mass of men in steel, their own banners equally proud, equally menacing. The space between you and them, that stretch of churned mud, dew-soaked grass, or dusty plain, suddenly seems both impossibly vast and terrifyingly small. It is the killing ground, a mainstream historical fact to consider. Medieval cavalry charges were not usually a wild, disorganized gallop, but ideally a disciplined, coordinated advance, often starting at a walk, then a trot, then building to a controlled canter or gallop in the final stages to maintain cohesion and maximize impact. The aim was to hit the enemy line like a single, irresistible iron fist, not to arrive breathless and scattered. The minutes stretch, taut and agonizing. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, ominous rhythm of your own breathing. Amplified within the confines of your helmet, your mouth is dry. Your palms, even within your steel gauntlets, are slick with sweat. You scan the enemy, trying to pick out their knights, their archers, their serried ranks of spearmen. You run through your training in your mind. Keep your shield up, your lance couched firmly, your eyes fixed on your target. Trust your horse, trust your comrades, trust your God, and try very, very hard not to disgrace yourself by, say, fainting, vomiting inside your helmet, a truly horrific prospect, or turning your horse around and galloping in the opposite direction. The pressure to appear fearless, to uphold the chivalric ideal of unwavering courage, is immense, even if privately your bowels are threatening to stage a full-scale rebellion. It's the medieval equivalent of stage fright, only instead of forgetting your lines, you might get a spear through your visor. The stakes, as ever, are just a little bit higher. Then the signal, a blast of trumpets, a deafening roar of war horns, a bellowed command from your lord. And the great, lumbering, steel-clad beast that is your cavalry formation begins to move. Slowly, at first, a ponderous, clanking advance. The ground trembles slightly under the weight of so many hooves. You can hear the creak of leather, the jingle of harness, the muttered prayers or oaths of the men around you. Your lance, that long, heavy spear we discussed, is couched under your arm, its point aimed towards the distant enemy. Your shield is braced. Your visor is down, your world narrowed to that suffocating slit of vision. You focus on the back of the knight in front of you, on the fluttering banner of your commander, trying to maintain your position in the tightly packed ranks. As you pick up speed, from a walk to a trot, then to a canter, the noise intensifies. The thundering of hooves becomes a deafening, earth-shaking roar, a sound designed to strike terror into the hearts of your opponents, even before you reach them. Your own war cry, and those of your comrades, tear from your throat, a primal scream of aggression, of fear, of adrenaline-fueled fury. God and St. George, perhaps, or your Lord's personal battle cry. It's a cacophony of sound, a sensory overload, that both heightens your senses and deadens your fear. Just a little. The wind whips past the slits in your visor, carrying the scent of churned earth, horse sweat, and the faint, acrid smell of your own anxious breath. Historians still debate the precise psychological impact of such a charge, both on the attackers, fueled by a potent cocktail of training, religious fervor, and mob mentality, and on the defenders, facing what must have seemed like an irresistible, terrifying avalanche of steel and horseflesh. Now you are at a full gallop, the ground blurring beneath you, your warhorse straining, its powerful muscles working in unison with yours. The enemy line rushes towards you with terrifying speed. You can see individual faces now, their eyes wide, their mouths open in screams or defiant shouts. You see the glint of their spear points, the dark mass of their shields. Arrows might be flying towards you, thudding into shields, glancing off armor with a shriek of tortured metal, or finding a vulnerable spot with a sickening thwack. You brace yourself for the impact. A prayer on your lips, your entire being focused on that one climactic moment of collision. This is what all those years of training, all that sweat and pain, all that heavy, uncomfortable armor have been leading up to. It's also, statistically speaking, a really good way to get yourself killed or maimed. No one ever said chivalry was a sensible career choice. Then, the impact. The shock is like hitting a solid wall at full speed. Your lance, if your aim is true and your luck holds, strikes an enemy's shield or breastplate with a sound like thunder, a jarring, bone-shattering crash that travels up your arm and through your entire body. Lances splinter, men scream, horses shriek and fall. The neatly ordered lines dissolve into a maelstrom of flailing limbs, rearing steeds, and a terrifying, intimate chaos. If your lance connects solidly, your opponent might be hurled from his saddle, a broken, armored puppet. If his lance finds you, or if your horse stumbles, you could be the one crashing to the earth. The wind knocked out of you, your armor a sudden, crushing weight. The sheer kinetic energy involved in a medieval cavalry charge, hundreds of pounds of man, horse, and steel moving at speed, was immense. It wasn't just a matter of individual combat. It was a weapon of shock and awe, designed to break the enemy's formation and their will to fight. A quirky or fringe tidbit for you. Some medieval battle cries were not just shouts of defiance or invocations of saints, but could also be quite personal or even humorous in a grim sort of way. A knight might shout his family motto, or a nickname, or even an inside joke with his comrades. There are tales of knights shouting things like, "For the pretty barmaid at the Red Lion," or "Remember the bad ale at Smithfield," just before impact. Perhaps it was a way of humanizing the inhumanity of it all. A fleeting moment of gallows humor before the carnage truly began. Or maybe they just had a bit too much of that pre-battle wine we talked about. One shudders to think of the battle cry, "Hold my mead and watch this." In those first few terrifying moments of impact, your world shrinks to the immediate vicinity of your horse's head. You are surrounded by a deafening, disorienting din, the clash of steel on steel. The screams of wounded men and horses, the bellowed commands that are instantly lost in the uproar. Dust and smoke fill the air, further obscuring your already limited vision. Your lance is gone, either shattered or dropped. Now, you must draw your sword, that heavy familiar weight in your gauntleted hand. Or perhaps you reach for your mace or battle axe, if you anticipate needing to do some serious, up-close and personal demolition work on an armored opponent. The charge has broken the enemy line, perhaps. Or maybe it has stalled against a resolute wall of spears and shields. Either way, the initial, organized momentum is lost. Now begins the swirling, chaotic, and utterly brutal reality of the melee, which we will explore in more terrifying detail in our next section. But even in these first few moments after the charge, the dangers are acute. If you are unhorsed, you are in mortal peril. Lying on the ground, encumbered by the weight of your armor, you are vulnerable to any enemy foot soldier with a dagger, a mace, or even just a rock. Getting back to your feet is a struggle. Finding your horse, if it hasn't bolted or been killed, is another challenge. Many a knight met his end, not in a glorious, one-on-one duel, but ignominiously. Trampled underfoot or dispatched by a common soldier, while struggling to rise from the mud. The mounted mayhem unleashed by that thundering charge is a sight and a sound and a smell that will be seared into your memory forever, assuming you survive to remember it. It's the smell of blood, of terrified horses, of churned earth, of hot metal, of voided bowels, both human and equine, for fear is a great leveler. It's the sound of 1,000 anvils being struck at once, mixed with the screams of 1,000 tortured souls. It's the sight of banners falling, of men cut down, of horses stumbling with horrific injuries. It is, in short, a vision of hell on earth, a brutal, terrifying, and utterly medieval spectacle. And you, Sir Knight, are right in the thick of it. Your heart pounding, your sword raised, fighting for your life, for your lord, and for whatever fleeting hope of glory or survival still flickers within your steel-encased breast. The romance of chivalry feels very far away indeed when you're trying to avoid getting an axe embedded in your helmet. The thunderous charge, that earth-shaking avalanche of horse and steel we just survived, or perhaps more accurately, endured, has now shattered against the enemy line, or perhaps recoiled from it like a wave breaking on a particularly stubborn and a pointy cliff. Your lance is a distant memory, a splintered ruin somewhere back on that churned-up field. Your ears are still ringing from the initial impact, that cataclysmic collision of irresistible force, an immovable object, or, more likely, two equally irresistible forces colliding with a rather messy and decidedly un-physics textbook-like result. The clean, theoretical lines of battle have dissolved into a heaving, sweating, screaming, and terrifyingly intimate scrum. Welcome, Sir Knight, to the melee, the savage dance of medieval warfare, where formations break down, where individual prowess and sheer animal survival instincts take over, and where the gruesome close quarters crush of battle will test every fiber of your being. every rivet in your expensive armor, and every prayer you muttered on the night's edge. Gone is the exhilarating, if terrifying, momentum of the unified charge. Now, you are an individual, or at best part of a small, struggling knot of comrades, surrounded by a maelstrom of chaos. The noise is overwhelming, a deafening symphony of destruction. The shriek of metal on metal as swords clash and armor is battered, the guttural roars of men exerting themselves to their utmost, the high-pitched screams of the wounded, both human and equine, the desperate neighing of terrified horses, the crack of terrified horses breaking bones, the wet, percussive thud of maces and axes finding their mark. It's a soundscape from a particularly vivid nightmare, amplified by the confines of your helmet, making it almost impossible to hear commands, to distinguish friend from foe in the swirling confusion, or even to think clearly. Your world has shrunk to the immediate few feet around you, a tiny island of desperate struggle in a sea of bloody brutality. If you are still fortunate enough to be mounted, your warhorse is now your most crucial ally and your greatest vulnerability. It rears and plunges, its eyes wide with terror, its breath rasping. As you try to control it amidst the press of bodies, you use your sword, or perhaps your mace or battle axe, to strike down at enemy foot soldiers who swarm around you, jabbing at your horse's legs with spears or trying to pull you from the saddle. You engage other mounted knights, a deadly, clattering ballet of parries, thrusts, and desperate lunges, each blow carrying the potential for a disabling wound or a fatal unseating. The ground is slick with blood and mud, littered with fallen men and struggling horses, making every movement treacherous. Your horse might stumble, it might be wounded, it might simply collapse from exhaustion or terror. And if you go down, as we've touched upon, your situation becomes infinitely more precarious. It's like trying to navigate a mosh pit during an earthquake. Only everyone is armed with very large, very sharp metal objects, and your ride is a half-ton panic attack on 4 legs. But let's imagine the worst, or at least the very common, has happened. You are unhorsed. Perhaps your steed was cut down from under you, or a well-aimed lance caught you at an awkward angle, or you simply lost your balance in a chaotic surge. You hit the ground with a jarring, bone-rattling thud that knocks the breath from your lungs. The weight of your armor, that steel embrace we discussed, suddenly transforming from a protective shell into a crushing, suffocating burden. Disorientation is immediate. The world is a confusing blur of mud, sky, flailing limbs, and trampling hooves. Getting back to your feet is your first, desperate priority. A monumental struggle against gravity, your own encumbrance, and the very real possibility of being trampled by a friendly or unfriendly horse before you can even attempt to stand. It's like trying to get up after slipping on ice while wearing a very heavy, very awkward refrigerator box. Not graceful, and definitely not easy. Once, or if, you regain your footing, you are now a very different kind of combatant. You are an armored infantryman, slow-moving, vulnerable, and likely separated from your comrades. The perspective shifts dramatically. You are no longer looking down on your enemies from the lofty vantage of your warhorse. You are now at their level, or often, looking up at mounted foes who now seem like terrifying giants. Foot soldiers, whom you might have disdained from horseback, now become immediate, lethal threats, swarming around you, seeking to exploit the gaps in your armor with their daggers, axes, or crude but effective polearms like billhooks, designed to pull a knight from his saddle or trip him up. Your shield, if you still have it, is your lifeline, deflecting blows, buying you precious seconds. Your sword, once a weapon of sweeping cuts, now becomes a tool for desperate thrusts and parries in the claustrophobic press. A mainstream historical fact to consider. The effectiveness of heavily armored knights when unhorsed and fighting on foot was a subject of much tactical debate and depended heavily on the terrain, the discipline of the opposing infantry, and the knight's own training and stamina. While formidable, they were not invincible, and well-coordinated infantry could often overwhelm isolated or exhausted knights. The development of infantry tactics specifically designed to counter knights, such as the pike square or the use of longbows with armor-piercing bodkin arrows, significantly altered the dynamics of medieval battlefields over time. In the savage dance of the melee, the rules of chivalry, those noble ideals you might have pondered during your vigil, often evaporate like morning mist in the heat of battle. The polite formalities of the tournament, the merciful treatment of a vanquished foe, these are luxuries ill-suited to a life or death struggle where your opponent is trying very earnestly to separate your head from your shoulders. While the concept of ransom for captured knights was a powerful economic and social factor, we'll delve into that later. In the immediate, brutal chaos of the melee, quarter was not always given, especially if passions were running high or if the fashions were running high or the enemy was perceived as particularly heinous, or if, frankly, it was just easier to kill a downed opponent than to bother taking him prisoner. It's a grim calculation made in a split second. A brutal equation where your life or his is the only possible sum. The weapons we discussed earlier now come into their own, each designed for a specific kind of gruesome efficiency in this close-quarters carnage. Your sword, if you're skilled, can find the gaps in an opponent's armor, the visor slits, the armpits, the joints at the elbow or knee. A well-aimed thrust here can be instantly fatal or disabling. But against plate armor, a slashing cut is often less effective, more likely to skid off with a jarring clang than to inflict serious damage. This is where your mace, your warhammer, or your battle axe become your best friends, if you can call such brutal implements friends. These are concussion weapons, designed not necessarily to pierce, but to crush, to break, to incapacitate through sheer blunt force trauma. A mace blow to a helmeted head, even if it doesn't break the steel, can concuss the man inside, leaving him stunned and vulnerable. A warhammer can dent and distort plate, trapping limbs or breaking bones beneath. An axe can cleave through shield and helm alike with terrifying force. The sounds these weapons make on impact are sickening. Not the relatively clean shink of a sword cut, but the dull, wet thud of crushing blows. The sickening crunch of bone. It's not pretty. It's not heroic. It's just brutal, exhausting, and terrifyingly effective. And then there's the dagger, the weapon of last resort, the tool for the most intimate and desperate moments of the melee. If you find yourself grappling with an opponent, both of you perhaps unhorsed and struggling in the mud, your primary weapon's lost or useless. It comes down to a brutal wrestling match, each of you fumbling for your dagger, trying to find that one vital, unprotected spot: the throat, the eye slit, the gap under the arm. This is killing at its most personal, a far cry from the relatively anonymous dispatch of a lance charge. It's a grunting, sweating, blood-soaked struggle for survival, where the only rule is to stay alive, whatever the cost. Historians still argue about the prevalence of such up-close dagger work in disabling or killing knights, particularly whether common foot soldiers were routinely able to get close enough and find the vulnerabilities in a knight's armor, or if it was more often knight versus knight in these desperate clinches. The sheer physicality of fighting in full armor for any length of time is almost beyond modern comprehension. Remember how hot and heavy that steel embrace felt even before the battle started. Now, add the adrenaline, the exertion, the fear. You are fighting for your life, swinging a heavy weapon, constantly moving or trying to, your body screaming for oxygen, your muscles burning with lactic acid, The heat inside your armor becomes a personal furnace. Your breath rasps in your helmet. Your vision swims with sweat and exhaustion. Dehydration is a constant enemy. Stamina, more than just brute strength or skill, often determines who survives the melee. The knight who can keep fighting, keep thinking, keep moving when his body is screaming for him to stop, is the one who might see another dawn. It's like running a marathon in a sauna while wearing a suit of armor and being repeatedly hit with heavy metal objects. Not exactly a recipe for a relaxing afternoon. The psychological toll is immense. The sensory overload, the constant threat of death or horrific injury, the sight of your comrades falling around you, the brutal acts you yourself are forced to commit to survive, all of this can push a man to his limits, and sometimes beyond. Some knights might enter a kind of battle rage, a berserker state where fear is suppressed, and they fight with a primal, almost inhuman fury. Others might be paralyzed by terror, unable to function effectively. Most perhaps oscillate between these extremes, moments of courage interspersed with waves of panic, driven by a desperate will to live. A quirky or fringe tidbit: there are accounts in some sagas and chronicles of warriors who, in the heat of battle, were said to be immune to wounds or possessed of supernatural strength, often attributed to this battle fury or even to divine or demonic aid. While these are likely exaggerations or mythological embellishments, they speak to the transformative, and often terrifying, psychological effects of intense combat. It's your brain's way of saying, okay, reality is currently too awful. Let's just switch to berserker mode and hope for the best. The savage dance of the melee is a brutal, chaotic, and deeply personal experience. It is here, in the mud and blood, surrounded by the dead and dying, that the romantic ideals of chivalry often meet their grimmest test. The knight who survives is not necessarily the most skilled, the bravest, or the most pious. Often, he is simply the luckiest, the strongest, the one who managed to stay on his horse a little longer, whose armor held up against that one crucial blow, or whose enemy made a fatal mistake at just the right moment. And as the melee rages on, as formations dissolve completely, and the battle becomes a series of desperate individual combats, you fight not for glory, not for honor, but for the most fundamental thing of all, your next breath. The cost of that breath in this savage, bloody arena is measured in pain, in terror, and in the brutal, intimate knowledge of what it truly means to kill or be killed. The savage dance of the melee, that brutal, swirling vortex of steel and desperation we just endured, inevitably has its casualties. Perhaps your luck that fickle battlefield companion finally ran out. A mace blow, glancing off your helmet, sends a constellation of agonizing stars exploding behind your eyes, and you reel in your saddle, stunned and disoriented. Or a well-aimed sword thrust finds a chink in your formidable armor, that steel embrace we so carefully examined, perhaps at the armpit or the vulnerable joint of your knee, sending a searing, sickening pain coursing through your body. Maybe your faithful warhorse, your trusted partner in this mounted mayhem, collapses beneath you, its legs scythed by a common foot soldier's billhook, and you crash to the earth with the bone-jarring finality of a felled oak. Whatever the cause, you are down. You are a fallen knight. And in the brutal calculus of the medieval battlefield, this is where your ordeal often enters a new, and frequently more terrifying, phase. The fight for glory is over. The fight for mere survival, against horrific wounds, primitive medical care, and the uncertain prospect of capture or a swift, ignominious death, now begins. The first sensation, if you are still conscious, is often a bewildering confusion of pain. It might be a sharp, piercing agony from a sword cut or a spear thrust. It could be the dull, throbbing, bone-deep ache of a crushing blow from a mace or warhammer. Broken limbs are common, the jagged ends of bone grating against each other with every movement. Head wounds, even if your helmet has absorbed some of the impact, can leave you dizzy, nauseous, your vision blurred, your thoughts disjointed. And then there is the blood, your own, warm and terrifyingly copious, soaking into your padded gambeson, pooling on the churned earth beneath you, or the blood of others, splattering your armor, a grim testament to the carnage around you. Remember how pristine and shining that armor once seemed. Now it's dented, mud-caked, and stained with the visceral reality of combat. It's less knight in shining armor, and more knight in slightly used, heavily dented, and alarmingly sticky armor. If you are fortunate, and the tide of battle has moved away from your immediate vicinity, or if your own side is victorious, your loyal squire, young Thomas of the now extremely anxious expression, might find you. Or perhaps some comrades, their own immediate fights concluded, will rally to your aid. Their first task is to drag you, if possible, to a place of relative safety, away from the immediate trampling hooves and opportunistic blows of any lingering enemies. Getting you out of your armor, especially if you are grievously wounded, is another agonizing ordeal. Every strap unbuckled, every plate removed, can send fresh waves of pain through your battered body. It's like being very carefully and very painfully peeled like a metallic, heavily bruised fruit. And then comes the medical care. Forget sterile operating theaters, skilled surgeons, and blessed anesthesia. Battlefield medicine, in the medieval period, was a brutal, often terrifying, and frequently ineffective affair. The most skilled practitioners available were usually barber surgeons, men whose primary trade was cutting hair and shaving beards, but who also performed minor surgeries like bloodletting, tooth pulling, and, crucially, treating wounds. Monastic infirmers, monks or nuns, with some knowledge of herbal remedies and basic medical texts, often those of ancient Greek and Roman physicians like Galen, whose theories, while influential, were not always particularly helpful or accurate, might also tend to the wounded, particularly if the battle took place near a religious house. A mainstream historical fact for you: medieval surgical understanding was severely limited by religious prescriptions against human dissection for much of the period, hindering anatomical knowledge. As such, treatments were often based on tradition, superstition, and a rather alarming degree of guesswork. For a deep cut, the primary concern was stopping the bleeding. This might involve direct pressure, or the application of cobwebs. Yes, cobwebs, believed to have styptic properties, or various herbal poultices. More drastically, a wound might be cauterized, seared shut with a red-hot iron or boiling oil. The pain of this procedure, performed on a fully conscious man, is almost beyond our modern comprehension. The smell of burning flesh, your own, would be added to the already horrific sensory landscape of your day. It's a treatment that makes you think a little bleeding might not be so bad after all, until you remember that bleeding to death is also a distinct and rather unpopular option. If a limb was shattered beyond repair, amputation might be attempted. This was a desperate, last-ditch measure, often fatal due to shock, blood loss, or subsequent infection. Imagine lying there, perhaps held down by several strong men, while the barber surgeon, with a saw that looks more suited to cutting firewood, hacks through your bone and flesh. The raw, agonizing screams would be just another sound in the general symphony of battlefield suffering. If you survived the procedure itself, the stump would likely be cauterized or dipped in boiling pitch to try and seal it, another wave of unimaginable agony. It's a grim choice. Lose a limb and possibly your life to the procedure, or definitely lose your life to gangrene. Not exactly a pick-your-poison scenario you'd relish. Infection was the great, unseen killer on the medieval battlefield. With no understanding of germ theory, and with hygiene standards that would make a modern health inspector faint dead away, almost any open wound was a breeding ground for bacteria. Wounds were often washed with wine, which had some mild antiseptic properties, purely by accident or urine less helpful, and considerably more unpleasant, and then packed with various substances, lint, moss, bread, or herbal concoctions of dubious efficacy. Puerperal fever was a scourge of childbed, as we've noted, but wound fever, erysipelas, gangrene. These were the invisible enemies that claimed far more lives than swords or lances in the days and weeks following a battle. Your expensive armor might have saved you from an instant death, only for you to succumb to a slow, agonizing demise from a festering wound a fortnight later. It's the medieval equivalent of surviving a shark attack only to die from a paper cut a week later because you didn't have any antiseptic wipes. A quirky or fringe tidbit. Some medieval medical texts recommended rather bizarre ingredients for wound dressings or potions. The weapon salve was a peculiar concept where the salve was applied not to the wound itself, but to the weapon that caused it, in the belief that this would magically heal the injury from a distance. Other remedies might involve powdered mummy. Yes, actual Egyptian mummies, unicorn horn, usually narwhal tusk, or various animal excrements, all based on a mixture of folklore, sympathetic magic, and the often desperate hope for anything that might work. You might find yourself fervently hoping your barber surgeon is a follower of the sensible herbal poultice school of thought, rather than the let's try a poultice of pigeon droppings and powdered unicorn. It worked for my Uncle Ethelred's gout variety. But what if your wounds, while perhaps serious, are not immediately life-threatening, and you find yourself not in the hands of your own side's medical practitioners, but in the hands of the enemy? If you are a knight, a man of noble birth, this is where the concept of ransom comes into play. Unlike common soldiers who might be slaughtered outright, or, if captured, treated with brutal indifference, a captured knight was a valuable commodity. He was worth money. A lot of money. The practice of ransoming captured nobles was a well-established part of the rules of war, such as they were in medieval Europe. Your captor, whether another knight or a group of common soldiers who recognized your status by your armor and heraldry, would see you not just as a defeated enemy, but as a walking, talking, or groaning, as the case may be, bag of gold. The amount of your ransom would depend on your rank, your wealth, your lands, and your importance. A powerful duke or a renowned champion might command an enormous sum, enough to enrich his captor for life. A lesser knight might be worth a more modest, but still significant, amount. Negotiations for ransom could be complex and protracted, involving your family, your lord, and sometimes even your king. You might be held captive for months, even years, while the funds were raised and the terms agreed. Conditions of captivity varied wildly. If you were captured by a courteous and chivalrous opponent, and such individuals did exist, even if they were sometimes rarer than a reliably dry medieval castle, you might be treated with a degree of respect, housed reasonably comfortably perhaps, under parole in a castle, and allowed to communicate with your family. However, if your captors were less scrupulous, or if the war was particularly bitter, your captivity could be harsh imprisonment in a dark, damp dungeon, poor food, ill treatment, all designed to encourage your family to pay up more quickly. It's a high-stakes waiting game, where your comfort, and sometimes your very survival, depends on your market value and the negotiating skills of your relatives. You're less a prisoner of war, more a very valuable, and currently rather unhappy, asset awaiting liquidation. Historians still argue about the extent to which the system of ransom truly mitigated the brutality of warfare for the knightly class. Did it genuinely save lives by incentivizing capture over killing? Or did it primarily benefit the wealthy and powerful, while lesser knights, or those whose families couldn't afford the ransom, were still often killed or left to languish? It likely did both. The prospect of a hefty ransom undoubtedly saved many a noble life that would otherwise have been forfeit. But it also created a very clear class distinction in the value of a human life on the battlefield. The common foot soldier, worth little in ransom, had a much higher chance of being killed out of hand if he surrendered. And what if you are not captured? What if your wounds are too severe? Or you are simply overlooked in the chaos? Or the battle is so ferocious that no quarter is given? Then you face death on the field. You might lie there for hours, bleeding, in agony, perhaps watching the sky darken, your life ebbing away amidst the screams of the dying and the triumphant shouts of the victors. Your final thoughts might be of your family, of your home, of sins unconfessed, of a life cut brutally short. It is a lonely and terrifying way to die. After the battle has passed, the field itself becomes a scene of grim industry. Scavengers, both local peasants and camp followers, will descend upon the dead and wounded, stripping them of anything of value: armor, weapons, clothing, jewels, even their teeth, if they have gold fillings, though that's more of a later period concern. Medieval dentistry being what it was, gold fillings were not exactly standard. Your fine suit of plate armor, that steel embrace you so painstakingly donned, could be unceremoniously hacked off your corpse and sold for a fraction of its value. Your body, along with those of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of others, might be unceremoniously dumped into a mass grave, a shallow pit dug hastily to prevent the spread of disease. There are no individual headstones, no respectful burials for most. You become an anonymous part of the grim harvest of war, your identity lost, your bones destined to mingle with those of friend and foe alike in the indifferent earth. The spiritual anxieties surrounding such a death were also profound for a medieval Christian. To die unconfessed, without last rites, to be left unburied in unconsecrated ground. These were terrifying prospects, believed to jeopardize the fate of your immortal soul. It's a brutal end, not just for the body, but for the spirit, a final stark reminder of the true cost of your knightly profession. The glory is fleeting. The crows and the worms, however, are eternal. Section 7. You've experienced the grim lottery of the battlefield's aftermath. Our fallen, or perhaps miraculously surviving knight. You've felt the searing pain of wounds, tasted the bitter dregs of defeat, or the fleeting elation of victory, and perhaps even contemplated the cold, impersonal efficiency of the ransom market, or the grim anonymity of a mass grave. The open field, with its thundering charges and savage melees, has left its indelible mark on your soul, if not your body. But medieval warfare wasn't always about those glorious, chaotic clashes of armies maneuvering across the landscape. Often, it was a far more static, more attritional, and in many ways, more insidiously brutal affair. The siege, whether you find yourself on the outside, laying siege to a stubbornly defiant castle or town, or trapped within its walls, desperately hoping for relief, you are about to enter a different kind of hell. A slow grind of hunger, disease, desperation, and the ever-present threat of a sudden, bloody assault. Imagine the scenario. Your lord's army has cornered the enemy, or a rebellious vassal, within the formidable stone embrace of their fortress. The drawbridge is up, the portcullis is down, the battlements are manned with grim-faced defenders. A direct assault on well-fortified walls is a bloody, costly, and often futile endeavor, at least in the early stages. So, begins the siege. This is not a swift, decisive engagement. It is a waiting game, a test of endurance, a battle of resources and wills that can drag on for weeks, months, even years. Your role as a knight shifts. The exhilarating, if terrifying dash of the cavalry charge is replaced by the tedious, back-breaking labor of constructing siege lines. The nerve-wracking tension of nighttime patrols, or the grim, repetitive duty of manning a siege engine. It's less heroic warrior and more heavily armed construction worker, with a very bad attitude and an even worse diet. If you are a part of the besieging army, your first task is to encircle the target, to cut off its supplies and any hope of reinforcement. This means establishing a fortified camp, digging trenches and earthworks, often called circumvallation and contravallation lines. Try saying that 3 times fast after a skin of ale, and setting up a perimeter to prevent any sorties by the defenders or relief attempts from outside. It's hard, unglamorous work often carried out under a harassing rain of arrows or crossbow bolts from the battlements. Your fine armor, that steel embrace we so carefully explored, still offers protection, but it's also a hot, heavy burden as you dig, chop wood, or help manhandle massive timbers into place for siege towers or catapults. Then comes the construction and deployment of the siege engines themselves, those marvels of medieval military engineering designed to batter down walls, hurl terrifying projectiles, or allow your troops to gain access to the ramparts. A mainstream historical fact for you: medieval siege weaponry was incredibly diverse and often surprisingly sophisticated. Trebuchets, giant counterweight-driven catapults, could hurl massive stones, sometimes weighing hundreds of pounds, over considerable distances, smashing into battlements and demoralizing defenders. Mangonels and onagers, torsion-powered catapults, could fire smaller stones or pots of Greek fire, a terrifyingly effective incendiary weapon. The medieval equivalent of napalm. Battering rams, huge, iron-tipped logs, often housed in protective sheds on wheels, would be relentlessly pounded against gates or weaker sections of the wall. And siege towers, massive wooden structures on wheels, sometimes taller than the walls themselves, would be laboriously rolled forward, allowing your men to fight their way onto the ramparts. Building and operating these machines required skill, patience, and a great deal of brute force. You might find yourself, Sir Knight, supervising a gang of sweating, cursing engineers and laborers, or even lending your own noble muscle to the task, all while dodging rocks and arrows from the increasingly desperate defenders. It's like a very aggressive, very dangerous medieval version of grand designs. Only the grand design is to knock someone else's house down. Life in the siege camp is a strange mixture of boredom, hard labor, and sudden bursts of violent activity. Disease is a constant threat. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of men and animals crammed together in often unsanitary conditions, with limited access to fresh water and a monotonous diet, create a perfect breeding ground for dysentery, typhus, and other delightful medieval ailments. Your chances of dying from a festering flux in your gut might be just as high, if not higher, than your chances of dying from an enemy sword. Food supplies for the besieging army can also become an issue if the siege drags on, especially if you are operating deep in enemy territory. Foraging parties might have to range further and further afield, risking ambush just to keep the army fed. Morale can plummet during a long, unproductive siege. The initial enthusiasm wanes, replaced by a grim, resentful determination, or even outright mutiny if conditions become too dire. A quirky or fringe tidbit. To break the monotony or demoralize the defenders, besieging armies sometimes engaged in rather gruesome psychological warfare. This could include catapulting diseased animal carcasses, or even the severed heads of captured enemies, over the walls, a not-so-subtle message about the fate awaiting those who continue to resist. Charming, no? It makes modern SEOPs look like a polite suggestion box. But now, let's flip the perspective. Imagine you are trapped inside those besieged walls. You are Sir Reginald, perhaps a loyal knight of the beleaguered Duke, and the enemy army, a vast, menacing horde, has surrounded your castle, cutting you off from the outside world. Your initial defiance, your trust in the strength of your stone walls, and the courage of your comrades begins to erode as the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months. The first and most pressing concern is supplies. How much food is stored in the granaries? How much fresh water in the cisterns? Rationing begins, first subtly, then with increasing severity. The choice cuts of meat disappear, replaced by salted fish or stringy, unidentifiable stews. Bread becomes coarser, scarcer. Wine is diluted. Hunger becomes a constant, gnawing companion. A dull ache in your belly that saps your strength and frays your nerves. You watch your own children, your wife, your comrades, grow thinner, paler, their eyes larger in their gaunt faces. It is a slow, agonizing descent into starvation, a brutal siege from within. Disease, in the cramped and increasingly squalid conditions of a besieged town or castle, spreads like wildfire. With limited sanitation, contaminated water sources, and a population weakened by hunger and stress, outbreaks of dysentery, typhus, or even plague, if you're particularly unlucky, can decimate the defenders far more effectively than any enemy weapon. The air becomes thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, of sickness, of latrines overflowing, of death. There is no escape. You are trapped with the stench, the fear, and the ever-dwindling hope. Historians still debate the precise impact of disease versus starvation in the outcome of many medieval sieges. But it's clear that these invisible enemies were often more deadly than the besiegers themselves. And then there's the constant bombardment, the terrifying thud of trebuchet stones smashing into the battlements, sending shards of rock and clouds of dust into the air, the whistle of mangonel shots, the occasional horrifying sight of a diseased carcass or a flaming pot of Greek fire sailing over the walls, spreading terror and destruction. Sleep becomes a distant memory, shattered by the relentless noise, the constant fear of a breach, the knowledge that at any moment a projectile could crash through the roof of your dwelling or find its mark on the ramparts where you stand guard. The psychological strain is immense. Hope dwindles with each passing day, replaced by a grim, despairing fatalism. You might find yourself envying those who died quickly in an open field battle, rather than enduring this slow, agonizing grind. If the besiegers attempt an assault, perhaps they've managed to breach the wall with a battering ram, or mining operations where sappers would dig tunnels under the walls, propping them up with wooden supports, and then set fire to the supports, causing a section of the wall to collapse, a terrifying prospect for those on top. Or they are rolling forward a massive siege tower. Then the fighting becomes as brutal and desperate as any melee. You, Sir Knight, would be on the ramparts, or in the breach, fighting hand-to-hand to repel the attackers. Boiling oil or water, though plain hot water, or even hot sand was often more common, and just as effective. Heavy rocks, crossbow bolts, arrows, anything that can be thrown, dropped, or shot is used to try and drive back the enemy. The fighting is ferocious, a last-ditch struggle for survival. If the attackers gain a foothold, the battle can spill into the streets of the town or the courtyards of the castle. A horrific, house-to-house struggle with no quarter given. It's the medieval equivalent of a very bad home invasion, where the invaders are heavily armed, extremely angry, and intent on redecorating your ancestral home with your entrails. The end of a siege, when it finally comes, can take several forms, none of them particularly pleasant if you are on the losing side. If starvation and disease have done their work, or if a major breach has been made and further resistance is clearly futile, the defenders might offer to surrender. Terms would be negotiated. Sometimes, if the defense has been particularly valiant, or if the besieger is feeling merciful or simply wants to avoid further losses, the garrison might be allowed to march out with their weapons and banners. A symbolic acknowledgement of their weapons and banners. Honor. More often, the terms are harsh. The defenders might have to surrender unconditionally, becoming prisoners of war, their fate dependent on the whims of the victor. Hostages might be taken to ensure compliance, and if a town or castle has resisted too stubbornly, or if it falls by storm after refusing terms of surrender, the consequences can be truly horrific. A general sack, where the victorious soldiers are unleashed to loot, rape, and murder at will. This was often seen as a right of the common soldier, a grim reward for the hardships and dangers of a long siege. The chivalric ideal of protecting the innocent often went right out the arrow slit during the sack of a captured city. For you, Sir Knight, whether attacker or defender, the siege is a profound and brutalizing experience. It strips away the veneer of chivalric glory, revealing the grim realities of warfare in its most attritional and desperate form. It is a test not just of courage and skill, but of raw endurance, of the ability to withstand hunger, disease, fear, and the slow crushing of hope. And if you survive it, you will emerge a changed man, haunted by the memory of the anemic faces of starving children, the stench of unburied dead, the terrifying roar of a collapsing wall, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest battles are acknowledged that sometimes the greatest battles, not won by the swift charge, but by the grim, unyielding refusal to simply give up, even when all seems lost. The siege has lifted, or the campaign has drawn to its bloody, exhausting close. You have, against considerable odds, survived the grinding despair of dwindling rations and rampant disease within besieged walls, or perhaps the brutal, mind-numbing labor and sudden, terrifying assaults of the besiegers' camp. You've witnessed the thundering charge, danced that savage, intimate ballet of the melee, and perhaps even lain amongst the fallen, contemplating the grim lottery of wounds, ransom, or an unceremonious death. The immediate, visceral roar of battle has faded, replaced by an echoing silence in your soul, a quiet that is somehow more unsettling than the din of combat itself. You, Sir Knight, are a veteran now, a survivor of the medieval battlefield's relentless brutality. But the war you are about to discover does not truly end when the last arrow is loosed or the final sword is sheathed. It leaves its echoes, its indelible marks, its lasting scars, both on your battered body and in the hidden, haunted landscape of your mind. This is the lingering price of your martial profession, the war that continues long after you've trudged away from the killing fields. Perhaps you are returning home, if home is a concept that still holds any clear meaning after what you've endured. The journey back might be one of grim triumph. If your side was victorious, your lord's banners flying proudly, a train of weary but elated soldiers laden with plunder, and a few high-value prisoners for ransom. Or it could be a somber, defeated retreat, a straggling column of exhausted, demoralized men, harried by the enemy, leaving a trail of wounded and abandoned comrades in your wake. Either way, there is a sense of disorientation as you leave the immediate theater of war. The rhythms of normal life, the tilling of fields, the commerce of towns, the laughter of children who haven't yet seen the horrors you carry in your memory can seem strange, almost unreal. You've lived for weeks, months, perhaps even years, in a state of heightened vigilance, where every shadow could hide an enemy, every sudden noise could signal an attack, readjusting to a world where a slammed door is just a slammed door, and not the prelude to a fatal spear thrust, is a surprisingly difficult transition. It's like a deep-sea diver returning too quickly to the surface. The change in pressure can be profoundly unsettling. The most immediate and visible legacies of your time on the battlefield are, of course, the physical scars. Few knights who saw extensive combat emerged unscathed. Remember those horrific wounds we discussed, the primitive medical care, the ever-present threat of infection. If you were lucky enough to survive a serious injury, you likely carry its mark forever. A jagged scar across your face, a constant reminder of a near-fatal sword cut, perhaps altering your appearance, making you a figure of fear or pity. A limb that healed badly, leaving you with a permanent limp, a constant ache, a diminished capacity for the very martial activities that defined your status. Maybe you lost an eye. Your world now, a perpetually lopsided, depth perception challenged reality. Or perhaps you suffer from chronic pain, the legacy of old fractures, of joints battered by years of wearing heavy armor and enduring the shocks of combat. That steel embrace, your erstwhile protector, has taken its toll, its sheer weight and rigidity contributing to a litany of aches and pains that will haunt your older years. It's the medieval equivalent of a professional athlete's body breaking down after a long career. Only your sport involved significantly more sharp objects and a higher chance of immediate, fatal disqualification. These physical scars were, in some ways, badges of honor in medieval society, visible proof of your courage, your experience, your survival. A grizzled, scarred veteran knight commanded a certain respect, but they also had practical consequences. A disabling injury could end your active military career, forcing you into an unwelcome retirement, perhaps managing your estates if you had any or seeking a quieter role in a noble household. It could affect your marriage prospects, or the stability of your existing marriage if your ability to perform your knightly duties, both on and off the field, was impaired. And the chronic pain, the constant discomfort, could cast a long shadow over your daily life, making even simple tasks a struggle. There were no effective painkillers beyond alcohol, or perhaps opium-based concoctions with all their attendant risks. So you learned to live with the pain, to carry it with you like an invisible, unwelcome companion. But perhaps even more insidious, and certainly less understood in the medieval period, were the mental and emotional scars. What we might now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) undoubtedly afflicted many medieval warriors, though it had no name then, no recognized diagnosis, no sympathetic counselors offering therapy. You, our battle-weary knight, might find yourself haunted by nightmares, reliving the horrors of the melee, the screams of the dying, the face of the man you killed in close combat. You might suffer from flashbacks, sudden, overwhelming sensory memories triggered by an innocuous sound or smell, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, echoing the clash of swords, the scent of roasting meat, sickeningly reminiscent of burning flesh. You might find yourself prone to fits of inexplicable rage or deep, unnerving melancholy. Your personality might change. The jovial, carefree young squire you once were could be replaced by a grim, silent, and emotionally distant man, unable to connect with loved ones, unable to find joy in the pursuits of peacetime. A mainstream historical fact is that while medieval society didn't have the language of modern psychology, chronicles and literature from the period do contain descriptions of warriors exhibiting symptoms consistent with what we would now call PTSD, such as persistent nightmares, emotional numbness, or sudden outbursts of aggression. There was little understanding of these invisible wounds. Such afflictions might be attributed to demonic possession, to a curse, to a humoral imbalance, or simply to a weakness of character. You might be urged to pray harder, to perform acts of penance, to man up and get over it. There was no concept of therapy, no support groups for traumatized veterans. You were largely left to wrestle with your demons alone in the dark watches of the night, perhaps seeking solace in alcohol, which only deepened the despair, or in an increasingly fervent, almost desperate piety, a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some folk remedies or religious rituals were believed to help with battle sicknesses or melancholy, perhaps involving specific prayers to certain saints known for healing mental afflictions, or the wearing of particular amulets, or even participation in mock battles or ritualized displays of aggression to try and purge the bad humors. It's like trying to fix a complex software bug by just turning the computer off and on again, or maybe by sacrificing a goat to the server gods, well-intentioned, perhaps, but unlikely to address the root cause. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval society recognized or acknowledged the psychological trauma of warfare, and whether the cultural framework of chivalry, with its emphasis on courage and stoicism, provided any effective coping mechanisms or, conversely, exacerbated the suffering by forcing men to suppress their emotional pain. Did the constant exposure to violence and death simply desensitize warriors, or did it leave a lasting corrosive impact on their psyches? The evidence is scattered and often indirect, but it suggests that the brutal realities of the battlefield did indeed leave deep and lasting scars on the minds of those who endured them. Your worldview, your faith, your very sense of self may have been profoundly altered by your experiences. The chivalric ideals that seemed so noble and inspiring in your youth, honor, glory, a just war fought for God and king, might now seem like hollow mockeries when measured against the reality of slaughter, betrayal, and the sheer, senseless suffering you have witnessed. Your faith in God might be deepened, a desperate clinging to divine mercy in a world that often seems devoid of it, or it might be shattered, replaced by a cynical disillusionment, a belief that life is nothing more than a brutal struggle for survival, governed by chance and violence. Your relationships with others may suffer. How can you explain to your wife, your children, your friends who have never seen a battlefield, the things you have seen, the things you have done? There is a gulf between your experience and theirs, an abyss of understanding that can leave you feeling profoundly isolated, even in the midst of your own family. Readjusting to the routines of peaceful life, if peace ever truly comes, can be incredibly difficult. The skills that kept you alive on the battlefield, hypervigilance, ruthless aggression, a capacity for swift, decisive violence, are not particularly well suited to managing an estate, participating in courtly diversions, or engaging in polite conversation about the price of wool. You might find yourself restless, irritable, easily provoked, yearning for the intense camaraderie and clear, if brutal, purpose of war. Some knights never truly left the battlefield behind, seeking out new conflicts, new tournaments, new opportunities to relive the only life they truly understood, until age or injury finally caught up with them. Others might throw themselves into pious works, seeking to atone for the violence of their past, endowing monasteries, going on pilgrimages, or even, in some cases, renouncing their worldly status to become monks or hermits. It's a search for peace, for redemption, for a way to silence the echoes of war that resound in their souls. Your legacy as a medieval knight is a complex one. To some, you might be a hero, a valiant warrior celebrated in song and story, a defender of the realm, a paragon of chivalry. To others, you might be a brutal enforcer, a privileged oppressor, a man whose wealth and status were built on violence and the exploitation of the weak. And to yourself, perhaps you are simply a survivor, a man who did what he had to do in a brutal and unforgiving world, a man who carries the weight of his deeds, both noble and ignoble, like the phantom weight of his long-discarded armor. The scars, both visible and invisible, are a testament to your journey, a permanent record of the price you paid for your knighthood, for your survival, for your fleeting moments of glory on the medieval battlefield. They are the war's echo, a resonance that will stay with you until your dying day, a final, brutal reminder of the life you led and the lives you took in the savage theater of medieval combat. And so, as the tales of thundering charges, clashing steel, and the grim aftermath of battle begin to soften in your mind, as the figures of these medieval knights with their heavy armor and heavier burdens recede into the mists of time, allow yourself to feel the gentle pull towards rest. Our journey through the brutal realities of their lives on the battlefield has been a long one tonight. A deep dive into a world so different from our own, yet filled with echoes of human struggles that still resonate courage in the face of fear. The search for meaning amidst chaos, the enduring impact of violence on the body and soul. Let the weight of these historical reflections settle now, not as a disquieting burden, but as a deep, grounding presence, a reminder of the vast tapestry of human experience that stretches behind us. You have walked alongside these nights, felt the tension on the eve of battle, the adrenaline of the charge, the grimness of the melee, the agony of wounds, the slow despair of a siege, and the lasting scars of conflict. You've borne witness to their world, and now it is time to return fully to your own, to the peace and comfort of your own quiet space. Imagine the great, heavy oaken doors of a medieval castle closing, not with a clang of imprisonment, but with a soft, final thud, shutting out the clamor of war, the anxieties of the past. Within those metaphorical walls, you are safe, you are secure. The night outside might be dark,